And we're back. It is the Fantasy Football Forum back again this week. We are back a few days later for scheduling conflicts, but we are happy again to be talking about the game we love here with the NFL. And it is now post July 4th, which means for most of us, the only thing we're looking at is baseball. But on the other side, we are looking at all the offseason news, and it's officially pre NFL preseason now as we kick off our talking about our next division. And I'm joined once again by my co-host Grant, coming from the lovely West Coast here. Grant, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing, Jeff?
Man, it's good. It's where I'm at. It's not quite as hot. We've had a little more rain, so again, we're not talking the weather,
Good.
but that's okay. I'm excited to break down. Today we've gone through both the AFC and NFC North and had some fun with
Mhm.
that. So we're gonna switch modes here. We're gonna go back to the AFC and we're gonna talk about the AFC East. So lots happened with the AFC East. Mainly, we've been enjoying the last few years of Josh Allen and the Bills kind of steamrolling this division and producing really high fantasy numbers for those that have drafted Buffalo players and where we can find value with other players. Last year, the Dolphins made some noise with signing Tyreek and having some success. We'll break down kind of each team again, like we did. We'll kind of see who's maybe intrigued or we're intrigued on, who maybe we're out on by each team. But if we look at the AFC East, Grant, kind of how I see it, and agree or disagree with me, that's fine. If we look at kind of realistic standings, I think we still have to start with Buffalo. They are still that top three with Kansas City and Cincinnati. They kind of lead the pack in the AFC as far as offenses and teams as a total. Next, I would actually still say the team that made the wild card and gave Buffalo a run for the money last year is the Dolphins. Still having Tyreek, having Jalen Waddle. Tua, obviously, his concussion and health concerns have been a topic this offseason and how he's handling that. But I think the Dolphins still are poised to make that, next jump as well. Then I would say realistically, we're looking at the Jets. Obviously, they've made a lot of acquisitions. They've probably been one of the most talked about teams this offseason. We'll get to them in just a little bit. But then lastly, I would look at the Patriots then if I'm looking at realistic standings. They kind of seem to me be the one team out as far as moves of trying to make a push to the playoffs and a potential Super Bowl run. Yeah. What are your thoughts as we
Hmm.
kind of look at this realistic look at the division here, Grant?
Yeah, I think that the AFC East is going to be interesting this next year. The Patriots have had it on lockdown since early 2000s with Brady. As we all know, when he moved to the Bucks, Bills
Yep.
kind of stepped in, took that void, took ownership of the division. This is the first year where in a long time for this division, that there's three teams that can legitimately win it.
Mm,
As you mentioned, I think the Bills, it's the Bills' spot to lose, but I mean, the Jets were a competent quarterback away from the playoffs last year, and the Dolphins have gotten better.
yep.
They're gonna have more, chemistry with the receivers and Tua. Hopefully, he has a healthy year. So, and hopefully stays healthy the whole year and plays all of his games. So, I think, and then you have the three teams that are actively making moves that I think are going to be very back and forth for the top of the division. And then you have Bill Belichick, who's there at the Patriots, who is kind of like a Greg Popovich sort of thing with the Spurs, where it's like you don't know what's going on this mastermind of coaching, right? And from the exterior, you think, okay, like not a lot of moves are being made, but who knows with Bill? He's probably putting together some freaking 12-5 or 13-4 squad that's going to come in and win it. So who knows, right? But yeah, I think it's going to be exciting your fantasy. I think you're going to see a lot um, of Jets players now with Aaron Rodgers
Mm,
being quarterback. You're going to see a lot of Jets players be viable fantasy assets, and typically in this division, it's been mostly Bills players sprinkling, Waddle and Tyreek and stuff for the Dolphins. But you have a lot of viable fantasy players in this division.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great bold call prediction. If you really want to say a bold call for the Patriots going like 12-4, 13-3, I think that if you wanna throw your money away at Vegas and just let them have it, there's your bet to make. Go whatever
Yes,
sports betting
yes,
app you
yeah.
want to go make. Go send your money that way. So I mean, speaking of bold calls, if I look at this division, I'll make the bold call actually that I think the Dolphins can run away with it. I'm not going to say run away. The Dolphins could actually take the division, the stranglehold that the Bills have had and the Patriots have had for so long. But I think the Dolphins have made some moves this year where they've had a really decent defense, right? They also, along with still having Xavier Howard, they brought in Jalen Ramsey, and we'll kind of get this as a little more in depth. But I want to keep teams to more fantasy relevant. But they're bringing in defensive pieces to try and stop Buffalo, to try and stop how Buffalo plays. Along with the Jets, where you mentioned it, they were just a quarterback away, but they've also had the key
Mm-hmm.
defensive pieces that they need to try and stop Buffalo as well. Bringing in Aaron Rodgers just elevates. I mean, you're going from Zach White or no, it's Mike White and
Zach
I
Wilson.
forget the. Yep, yep. You're definitely have an upgrade quarterback there. There's really no question of even at Aaron Rodgers as his almost age 40 season is definitely going to be better than what they had before. Where Buffalo kind of, to me, kind of made some head scratching moves or did not make some moves that we would have liked to see them continue to keep pace with being that division leader. But then again, to me, like I said, I still see the Patriots, even on a bold call, I still would see them finishing last, where I don't see that they've made those moves. And yes, it's one thing to say, yes, they've had Belichick, they've seen success, where the one losing season he's had since Brady took over was actually when Cam Newton was the quarterback, but it was still, they were 7-9 or something like that that year, where it was really close. They still played their style of football, but um, so I don't know. To me, it screams that this division is going to be really. The Jets and the Dolphins are putting pieces in to take Buffalo away, and I kind of look at what Buffalo has and says, do they really? Can they do that? So I think this is going to
Mm-hmm.
be, like you said. I agree. It's going to be a really fun division to watch. It's going to be tough. I could definitely see the division winner not being the first overall in the AFC as far as record goes, just because of how tough it's going to be. You could end up seeing the division winner being actually the third place team and, playing wild card weekend. So, but, well, what are your thoughts on bull call standings? Do you agree? Have any different takes on that?
Oh man, I mean, personally for me, I think the Jets have. I agree. I think the Dolphins could easily win the division. I think if Tua stays healthy, that's the biggest question mark. He stays healthy the whole season. I think that the
Yep.
Dolphins have a viable shot. I mean, I personally think Bull Call will be Jets winning division, but either of those teams I think would be a very I guess fair approach to the division. Other than the Bills, obviously win the division this year, but
Right.
um, yeah, I think that's the big thing. The Bull Call is going to be um, also too like fantasy wise, right? Like, does Aaron Rodgers become like a top three quarterback with a different offense, different weapons, right? So it's a lot of things can happen with this division, and I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, let's go into each team, and as we've done in the past, we'll go who finished last to first place, and last place finished last year in this division was the New York Jets. So the team that's been most talked about because of who they've signed, and we've already spoken about a little bit, is the Jets. I'll go through who they lost, fantasy pertinent. Who they lost this offseason. They traded away Elijah Moore, which we've already covered. If you missed the AFC North division, it's on our channel, so go look up and find that one. But he's now with Cleveland Browns. They've also let go wide receiver Braxton Berrios, which, unless you play in super deep leagues, you probably don't care about him. And then everybody's favorite waiver wire pickup, or not maybe the favorite, but one of the favorite waiver wire pickup quarterbacks last year was Mike White. They parted ways with him. They did not part ways with Zach Wilson. So we'll see what Zach Wilson, if he is still relevant this year, behind Aaron Rodgers. And then last, they newly acquired from trade to Jacksonville last year. They let James Robinson go. So not really any splash plays, but that's also not to be expected as far as what they're letting go. They brought in, of course, we already talked about Aaron Rodgers. They added running back Ty Johnson. And when they signed Aaron Rodgers, he brought along his two friends, Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb from Green Bay. They added quarterback Tim Boyle, which, again, that doesn't matter fantasy-wise. But then the other wide receiver they added was former Kansas City wide receiver McCole Hardman. So want to get a little speed with that. As far as the draft, the only fantasy potentially relevant draft that we saw from them was round 5. They drafted running back Israel Abanikanda out of Pittsburgh, and he was one where, had he had a different landing spot, I think we may be talking about, how he fares as a rookie. But with this backfield behind Brees Hall, nursing that, trying to get better from his ACL tear last year, to they had Zonovan Knight. It's a very crowded room, but it's very high depth. So initial thoughts on what the Jets are doing. I mean, you kind of alluded to a little bit, but kind of what does it look like they're trying to do from your perspective here from this offseason?
I mean, I think they're just trying to. Their defense was solid last year. The joke for fantasy, right? The last 5 or 6 years ago was draft wherever team the Jets were playing, right? And it was like that was the joke. And so the Jets have kind of the laughing stock of fantasy football for a long time. It's been very few relevant fantasy players, offense or defense, that you'd ever pick. You never pick the Jets defense, right? And last year they had a great defense, and they,
Right.
I think this year what they're doing, the coaching staff, management wisely brought in a veteran and signed a veteran, two receivers who have experience with their quarterback. One's a veteran, one is a younger player, and then also brought in a speedster, McCole Hardman with Kansas City. And so,
Yep.
to me, I really see Aaron Rodgers. People kind of have this stale taste in his mouth, in your mouth of him. Last few years, the Green Bay, he was kind of mediocre. Like, I really see him doing well this year. At a minimum, like, they're gonna be throwing the ball a lot, and also, and on top of that, you've got Brees Hall, who is gonna be hungry. I'm hoping he's healthy. He looked fantastic before he got injured, so I'm really hoping that he's gonna open up holes, punch out 4 to 5 yard runs, put Aaron Rodgers in like a 2nd and 5 situation where we see some more downfield shots, where we see a little more, like, the playbook open up a little bit more and have more viable passing downs, especially for fantasy, which is going to help more attempts, more yak, things of that nature. That's going to really help increase numbers, especially if you're in a full point PPR league.
Right. So as you look at this team, and I'll give my thoughts after I ask this here, but if there's one player you're going to want to try to pay attention to, you yourself, as you go to fantasy drafts, what's the one player you might change your mind on based on reports coming out of camp? So if you don't like necessarily a player going into the season, what is the thing that what are the reports that could change your mind? Who's that player for you out of the Jets?
I think for me it's probably Brees Hall, just because as we go through training camp, if we keep hearing reports like, hey, he's cutting well, the knee looks good, he's sharp as ever, we're getting coaching staff reports saying this is the best that he's looked, all these hype stories, if we're getting a lot of that, I'm gonna be all on the Brees train, and
Yep.
he knows I'm probably gonna try this RB0 strategy. I'm gonna go all in on this year, but shoot, if Brees Hall is there, I'm who knows? Maybe I actually go in and take him, but like that's probably the biggest player that I think is gonna rise or fall because if he looks a little slow, or we get reports that say, hey, we're going to hold him out a few weeks the first of the season, we're not going to play him at all preseason, we're not giving him until week 4, week 5, that's going to definitely change his fantasy value. He'll probably slip several more rounds. So that's something that I'm really watching for, especially with these players who have an ACL injury. You look at people who have had knee problems like Saquon and others. Like it took them a full season
Yep.
between, like, they had the ACL injury, then they have a full regular season where they were still kind of getting back into the rhythm of things. Then there was the following season when they had their best season. So with Brees, same concerns there is, will he be 100% or close to it this season? We'll find out.
Yep. So he's the guy also I'm on as far as he's the guy that I could change my opinion on. And initially, my rule of thumb when I'm looking at who to draft, who I want, I tend to say, my theory is always ACL, major knee injury.
Mm,
Like you just said, we see it 1 year removed. And this obviously happened last year. However, we have seen some exceptions to that rule. Adrian Peterson
mm-hmm,
back in the day went out and had one of his best seasons the year after an ACL tear. So there are some exceptions to that rule where we've already seen, I
mm,
think it was in either May or June in OTAs where Brees Hall was clocked running at 22 miles an hour, which with an ACL, straight line running is not the issue, it's the cutting. Um, but you're looking at potential RB1 overall, not just RB1, but RB1 overall potential with Brees Hall. And his injury is currently what is, sinking his ADP because he's currently the
mm,
running back 12 going off in the middle of the third round. But if you're going, like you said, if you're going for a zero RB, or if you want to do what's a anchor RB or hero RB, whatever the term is, where you're taking one running back and bolstering your roster with wide receivers, that then later running backs, you're picking guys up that if he misses time early in the season, you can fill it in, that when he comes back, you all of a sudden have a lot more top heavy team because of that. So
mm,
um, he is definitely going to be one that if reports come out and he's struggling, he's not right, he's got some soreness, we start hearing vibes of what J.K. Dobbins had last year, where should have been out on him. Then
mm.
yeah, I might end up being out more. But if it all seems to either be no news or it's all positive, then yeah, I think I would be a lot more in on that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so for me, with we have obviously a new quarterback. There is somebody I'm currently out on ADP wise, and this is not really a popular one to be out on ADP wise, but I have questions with what chemistry is going to be there, style of play that he plays. I'm talking about Garrett Wilson, second year wide receiver for New York. I am not denying the talent that he has. He is obviously up there with the Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, or just under them as far as talent wise goes. He is definitely on pace to be able to be at that level. My concern is he is very much a let's just go figure out the route as we need to, or at least that's the way he played his rookie year. Now, obviously, that is subject to change. He could grow a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But historically, Rodgers has not been that type of quarterback that likes to target those types of wide receivers. Devontae Adams took several years to become a very route tactician that he is now when he was Rodgers' favorite target. Also, with the Jets bringing in both Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb, plus signing McCole Hardman, all of a sudden we have a very, very crowded offense. And I still have concerns with Rodgers, while I think the pace of play could increase this year, I'm concerned because the last 2, 3 seasons in Green Bay, very low pace of play. So it was they're on the league bottom. Um, Garrett Wilson's going off in the
Mm.
early or the mid second round as wide receiver 10. And to me, if I'm depending on my structure, I just don't feel comfortable taking him that high.
Mm. I agree with you, and you brought a good point about the crowded wide receiver room. To further kind of elaborate on that, Aaron Rodgers easily gets frustrated with receivers. We've seen that at Green Bay over the years, especially rookies,
Yep.
where and oftentimes it's not always their fault. It could be the OC, it could be him, Aaron's fault,
Right.
or whatever. But I could see him favoring both Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb to start the season, just because he's known
Yep.
them, he has rapport with them. You can practice all you want in preseason. When it comes down to you're trying to make first downs, you're going to the guys that you feel like are dependable. So that is also something where I think Garrett Wilson exceeded expectations for the Zach Wilson the Zach Wilson Mike White combo he was having to deal with last year. He exceeded the expectations, so people kind of
Right.
have on this pedestal of like, wow, we're expecting him here. He performed up here, so therefore with Rodgers, he's gonna go even
Right.
higher. And reality is,
Yep.
like you mentioned, it's a crowded receiver room, and Aaron's going to have favorites. So I do agree with you. I could just thinking about this, like second round pick, Garrett Wilson, like it's a little bold. And I think it's going to settle. I really think he's going to settle. I think he's going to settle like middle of the third or maybe fourth. I still don't. I'm just not hot on him, honestly. Maybe this is my hot
Yeah.
take, but even if he's there in the fourth round, I'm picking someone else. I just don't
It
like the matchup. It's just something bad. It doesn't sit right with me. Something doesn't match
Yep.
up.
There's a lot that doesn't match up, and I mean I'm not gonna
Yeah.
say I'm just fully out on him, but
Mm-hmm.
he's gonna have to fall for me, and it'll honestly have to
Mm-hmm.
be team build. And if for some reason he's my third wide receiver that I'm taking, and it's a 3 wide receiver team where PPR, sure, let's take a flyer on him
Yeah.
then, and I may shoot for upside. But my fear
Yeah.
is we're drafting him at a ceiling, and he's gonna disappoint us. The player I'm higher on,
Yeah. And
honestly, it's
that's
not
yeah.
really a draftable player. Oh no, go for it.
No, I was saying it reminds me of how I felt about um like Jordan Reed. It's who I felt with
Yep.
Washington for years. Like he had these seasons where he was so good and he was just so bad. And I just couldn't do it. Or like Julio Jones. Like I know the talent was there, but like me personally as a manager, I just couldn't draft either of those guys. Like
Right.
and I'm not saying they were bad. It just like for me, I just felt like I just couldn't do it. I would always draft someone else because whenever I picked them, they would have these crazy years, and I feel like Garrett Wilson's how I feel right now. I don't have a good feeling about it, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm also not an expert. I'm not getting paid for this, right? So, um,
You didn't get your check?
yeah, who knows? Yeah,
You didn't get your check in
yeah,
the mail?
expect it in the mail any day. Oh man.
Yeah, any day should be there any day. Yeah. I think like if I'm
Yep.
taking a
Good.
second
Good.
year, and we can talk about breakout second year wide receivers all we want, because that may be a topic as we get into drafts a little bit later. But I might take a guy like Chris Olave, who
Mm-hmm.
has it's around later right now. He's also the team's number one, and it's a lot clearer path, I think, to have a little more success. Where I like a guy on this, and we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on him because you can honestly, depending on your draft, unless you're super deep and you're taking like 4 tight ends or 3 tight ends really
Mm-hmm.
late, if your draft doesn't go 20 rounds, honestly, you're looking at, this is going to be a waiver wire pickup for you. But I am intrigued, and we'll be paying attention a little bit to Tyler Conklin, the tight end,
Mm-hmm.
because historically Rodgers has liked his tight ends. So
Yeah.
this is where I'm kind of intrigued to
Mm-hmm.
see what comes out. And he goes in the 19th round. He's tight end 27. But if you're not getting the Kelseys or the Mark Andrews, the tier
Mm-hmm.
one, and you just want to push tight end down because you don't like it, this is a guy that I would say, okay, take one of these as far as, take two or three in this type of group and say who's going to win it and go from
Hmm.
there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that tight end, which we'll go through a positional breakdown and kind of like a top
Yep.
five, top 10. I'm sure we'll do that later in this offseason. But I agree with you. I think I like the potential having a veteran quarterback that has a repertoire with tight ends, and this is a great value play. I think this is a good pickup. I'm probably going to look for something similar if just the way my draft works out, I don't secure one of those top tight ends. And I'm liking. I like where I like where Conklin's coming from, and I think with the Jets they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more. So I'm hoping to get some solid points from this guy if I draft him.
Yeah, it even just might be a more touchdown, but that can have also value,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the tight end wasteland that we always see. All right,
Mm-hmm.
moving
For sure.
on. Moving on, New England Patriots, and we kind of already alluded to this in kind of the breakdown. They're kind of the team that I don't see as made the moves. They may tell you that they made these moves, but in the offseason, I don't think they made the moves that says we are going for it and we're going to go after that. I think this is a team that is in major flux, and I'm not sure what we're going to get with them. Um, One of the biggest offseason pieces as far as news is they brought back Bill O'Brien as their offensive coordinator. So no longer doing the Matt Patricia defensive minded offensive coordinator mix. So hopefully that kind of helps the offense a little bit. But as far as fantasy wise, who's changed around for them, they lost Nelson Aguilar, which most people didn't have on their fantasy team. Damian Harris, who
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately was injured last year, but he was somebody people had liked. Jacoby Myers, which depending on how deep your league was, you might have had him. And the rest you may or may not have rostered, but it was Brian Hoyer and Jonnu Smith. And to replace them, they brought in, again, former Kansas City Chief Juju Smith Schuster, running back James Robinson from the Jets, although I think he is an early potential cut candidate. So if you're listening to this, he might be cut at that time. Tight end Mike Gesicki from the Dolphins and quarterback Trace McSorley, I think from the Cardinals. The only really
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
relevant draft pick offensive wise that we look at is round 6. They picked up wide receiver Keishon Butte from LSU. So thoughts on what we might see from New England this year?
Yeah, I think with New England's offense, it's gonna be. I feel like it's gonna be about as unpredictable as it was last year, where maybe you put Johnny Smith as a flyer tight end, touchdown dependent play if your primary tight end was injured. You know, I guess before Damian Harris got injured, you're kind of doing the dance with him at running back. I mean, I think that New England right now is there's not a lot of real high end high end draft picks for me.
Yep.
And I think obviously, you have Ramondre Stevenson is probably the one player that we'll talk about in depth a little bit here is just like
Sure.
kind of he's going to be the running back that is going to be the focal point of the offense, I feel like. And with just the Mac Jones led attack, if we see regression from him like we did last season compared to his rookie year, I think that Ramondre is gonna shoulder more of the offensive load. But for receivers, I think we could probably both agree nothing too exciting here. Lots of waiver wire pickups or fill-ins for bye weeks, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. The biggest player I could be changed on as far as New England goes, the biggest player I'll actually be paying attention to off-season news, training camp news is going to actually be Ramondre Stevenson, where last year he had, I think, a 60% snap share, which I think it was at 60. It might have been more than that. I don't have that direct number in front of me, but
Mm-hmm.
no running back for the Patriots has had that since I think it might have been LeGarrette Blount years and years ago. And I could even be wrong there. So typically from New England backfield, we do see kind of that committee backfield where if reports are coming out, because they did not draft a big running back, they also have not signed one as of yet. And of course, we're recording this on July 9th, so that could change. But depending on what reports are, will be kind of a telling if Stevenson's going to have the same type of workload he had last year, or if guys like Kevin White or Pierre Strong or somebody else is getting some of that work that's going to take a little bit more. But if Stevenson is, lined up to get the bulk of that work, I think his ADP is, still actually relatively low. He's at running back 10, going at the end of
Mm-hmm.
second rounds. So if you're in a draft and you're, beginning of the first round and you go wide receiver first, that if he's the running back that you take at the end of the second round, that's a pretty balanced attack where you have that anchor running back for your team.
Mm-hmm. I do agree with you. I think that as we talk, we'll talk about the different styles of draft later in this preseason, but I do agree. It is again. I think Ramondre is a victim of the success of the team, and the Patriots are not the Tom Brady Patriots of old, hyped
Yep.
in every year. Are they going to win it or not? And I think his fantasy draft position, his ADP currently in July, reflects kind of the what people view about the team. I do agree with you. I think if you can snag him there at this kind of like end of the second round, third round. And I think it's a great value play. I think people are going to overlook him. They're going to say, oh, it's the Patriots. I don't feel good about the team, blah, blah, blah. But just based on pure volume, I think that he's going to do well. Again, the key is, are they going to bring
Yeah.
in someone, a high profile free agent that to help shoulder the load, or is he going to take the whole thing and they're going to try to cheap out and figure out some things next offseason? But I do think he is the one that I am pretty high on, and if he's available to me, um, I do like the volume. I like him. I do like how the Patriots are kind of more run centered, and Mac Jones is kind of taking this back step a little bit, which fantasy wise is great. Maybe not so much for the team, but it helps fantasy wise the I guess Ramondre get a bunch of volume, which is now really hard to get with running backs on most teams.
Yeah, because he does have pass catching, work.
Mm-hmm.
He has the ability to do that. He showed that last year. So that's to me, it's going to be the biggest. If I see reports, hey, he's probably only going to have a 50-50 split. It's going to be, three backs that we really want to feature. I might be a little more out on him, but if it's coming out where he's getting most of the work and a lot of this is going there, then yeah, definitely he's the guy where I'm like, okay, I will, pay that second round price for a potential
Mm-hmm.
top 5, top 10 back that, yeah, I'm going to draft him at where his ADP is because that is what it's a good value there. Um, there's not really a player as far as Patriot players go that I'm out on ADP simply because they are, like you already mentioned this, that Reminder is the most expensive one going at the end of the second round. Everybody else is pushed down a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
it's probably justifiable just because it's been a slow paced offense. We don't know what they're gonna do. If there's somebody that I am actually intrigued on, it's okay. It's going to be a very tight end topic heavy show. I already know that. But going back to the Tyler Conklin talk we had with the Jets, newly acquired tight end Mike Gesicki is getting reunited with offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien. And if there's a tight end that could masquerade as a wide receiver, it's going to be Mike Gesicki because he had that ability where it was reported on when he was with Miami. He was never used that way, but he has that ability to be a slot or big wide receiver in the middle of the field. And to me, that says this is not a Patriots team where they want to throw deep. They do have the option, but they didn't bring in guys to say, we want to throw deep. We're not going to trust Mac Jones that way. So I want the guy, and Gasecki goes off at the end of the 16th round. So again, if you're totally punting the tight end position and just taking a guy that could potentially break out, this is just that chance of like, hey, this might happen. So that's the guy I'm intrigued on that I could, depending on my team build, say I'm going to go that route.
Yeah, and I think that Gasecki is interesting because last year we thought the stars aligned with that team. With Tua was one of the most efficient passers when he was healthy,
Yep.
and with both Waddle and Hill getting lots of volume, the offense was cooking with the Dolphins. Gasecki was all over the map with his points. So I
Yep.
think it really is. It has to be, it's not so much just, hey, here's his skill, he's really good, we're getting the ball. It's more of a game plan situation, which I'm hoping with Bill O'Brien, they come in, they kind of scheme for him. Um, that's what I'm hoping for because it wasn't there, and you thought that it was going to happen last year. I think we even talked about it, and a lot of other podcasts I'm sure talked about it a lot, but they were really hyping him up.
Sure.
I mean, it was like, hey, Gesicki's going to be great. This is going to be top 5, 6 tight end with Tua. Like, this is gonna be amazing. It didn't happen. So
Right.
I do think that I'm hoping he gets schemed a little more. I'm hoping that it becomes a viable tight end option that we can buy on a budget. But yeah, I mean, if you're hopefully round 15, you've got your defense, your kicker, and you're kind of filling your
If
bench
you still
up,
play
and
with those.
I think yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, last year he was stuck behind, which, to be fair, he was stuck behind Hill and Waddle, where at best he was
Mm-hmm.
the third option in that offense, and that offense was built differently than what this Patriots team is. So I think team build in a real football sense elevates them to a potential fantasy production.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't have to pay a big price for him. Depending on how late your draft is or how deep your draft is, you can pick him up off the waiver wire. So I see the potential there, I guess, is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
um, alluding to. So, all right, no need to spend too much time on the rest of the Patriots because they're not that interesting. So we'll on to a more interesting team, Miami Dolphins, who finished second in the division last year. So um, honestly, I don't have too much as far as, I mean, we've all seen the potential legal stuff that Hill's faced, but I think that's all kind of gone away. Nothing's really there as far as anything substantial for suspensions coming. Um, Miami from last year, they lost, obviously, we just talked about him, Mike Gesicki. They lost Trent Sherfield, but they acquired from the Jets, they acquired Mike White and Braxton Berrios, and then they acquired tight end Tyler Croft. The
Mm-hmm.
biggest draft, fantasy wise, is they drafted in the third round Devon Achane out of Texas A&M, who similar to guys like Elijah Mitchell and you mean Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Achane has speed, so Miami's trying to tell us that they want to win with speed. And last year when they were successful with Tua, it worked. They were a very high paced, fast offense that scored. So, do you think that adding these weapons, if Tua's healthy, do you think they are able to build on what they had success wise from last year?
I think real football wise, it helps them. There's a lot of pressure on both Tyreek and Waddle. I think a lot of teams didn't figure out how to properly guard them. Normally, you have a top receiver that gets a lot of the coverage, gets the prime safety, the prime corner, shadows in the whole game. Um, the Dolphins were interesting because you had two really good receivers that split the attention, and I think teams didn't really know how to handle it. So I think that adding more options is definitely going to help them real football wise. I think fantasy,
Yeah, the
I am
yep,
really
go for it.
interested to see how that helps them. Just because I think that, so Tyreek finished as number 2 receiver last year. Waddle was number 7. So you have the 2 and the number 7 receiver on the same team with a quarterback who's injured for a lot of different games. The ceiling's pretty high for the Dolphins, those 2 Dolphins receivers. And I think adding more weapons. I mean, you saw the percentage of passes that went to both these guys. It was insane. So, like, for fantasy purposes, this is one of the few times where I think adding more people hurts fantasy, just because I mean, Tua only saw these 2 guys. It was incredible, right? And we saw it last year. So I think adding more people, real football wise, help the team. I think fantasy wise, I think we're going to see Hill and Waddle just regress a couple of spots on that list, just because they're adding more weapons. They're trying to be more balanced, which is healthier for the team, but for fantasy owners, it's not as good.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm going to kind of jump down to, you mentioned Jalen Waddle, and
Mm-hmm.
while he finished as a wide receiver 7 last year, which nobody saw, we didn't know that team was going to be able to support 2 top 10 wide receivers. I mean, Waddle this year is the guy at ADP I'm avoiding, simply
Mm-hmm.
because he is going, again, late second round. He's going as the wide receiver 11. Right now, he's right behind Garrett Wilson. I would rather wait one more round and take a running back in the late second round. And in the third round, I can go ahead and get the number 1 wide receiver for another team like Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, where I'm going to get that number 1 wide receiver. I understand the risk is, yeah, he could finish as the top, 10 wide receiver again. I don't know that I want to build my team around taking a team's number 2 that high for fantasy drafts. I think you're drafting him at what his ceiling is,
Mm-hmm.
versus having a little room there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think people will need to evaluate where they sit in their draft because you know just for receivers, right? Like you look at who's ahead and behind him in points, right? AJ Brown number 5, CeeDee Lamb number 6, Sun God Amon St. Ra 8, Amari Cooper 9, right?
Yep.
So you have to kind of see where your team's at, and you know, there are good options. I do agree though. I don't think you need to reach at all. I think it's you kind of have to see what comes around to you, especially if
Right.
you're a person who is on a turn or you're kind of like you're a 12-person league and you're that mid pick. You want to make sure that you're doing the right thing because I do agree, when you're picking a number 2 receiver who had a really good year, you start kind of things can get really weird when it comes to how they're going to spread the offense out and everything. But I do say, like, when you look at him, I would probably take him over some other situations. But like again, like the Cowboys kind of get weird, like what's going on with the Cowboys and like which we'll talk about the Cowboys later, right? But there's a
Yep.
bunch of things where um, you see these trends of players that you think, okay, maybe I reach for Waddle, and then you kind of have to reset and say, okay, no, I need to get a running back, and
Right.
it might mess up your RB0 situation. It might become more of a hero draft style, but I think that Tyreek's definitely worth it. I think you pay the price for Tyreek, but I
Yep.
think Waddle is someone you kind of have to see what your draft capital is and wait.
Yeah, and speaking of seeing and waiting, I mean there are 2 storylines that I'll be paying attention to this offseason for Miami. One will be,
Mm-hmm.
what is Tua's health? Obviously we can't
Mm-hmm.
ever know what concussions are going to be. That was obviously one of the biggest question marks last year, but the offense still seemed to have production without him. It wasn't as much, but there was still production there. Bringing in Mike White also is a little bit ahead of, I think, the 7th round rookie that they had last year. So the other story that I think is a little more impactful fantasy wise, is the running back room for Miami, and I did misstate. I mean, they have Mostert, not Elijah Mitchell. He's still with San Francisco, but you have Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, and Jeff Wilson, all very capable backs, all within a 4-round spread. And it's not, you're not having to pay a lot of price for this, but if news is coming out that there's a clear leader in the backfield, then depending on the jump, that's who, it's again, we talked about with Chicago last week, an ambiguous backfield. I said it correctly that time. But right now, A-Chain goes off at the around 11, and Raheem Mostert's in the 13th, and Jeff Wilson's down the 15th. But depending on playing time, or depending on what the story comes out, obviously A-Chain has speed, which that's great. But we have not seen a healthy season from Mostert in a while, or Jeff Wilson. So that's where I am intrigued by A-Chain. He'd be the first one that I'm out on, depending on the news and if his draft stock just jumps another 5 rounds as we get to draft season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, Miami, I feel like the last couple of years has definitely had the carousel of running backs, and it is a lot of it's late August, right? And it's like, oh, so and so's lead back out of camp, or even there will be a trade that happens or whatever. I mean, that was what happened last year, which was like they kind of played this carousel back and forth of who is the RB1 for the week. And it was tough. I mean, we had people who had Miami running backs, and it was hard to know who to start. I mean, they're almost unstartable because you would start one, and it's not even that you'd expect 7 points. Like, oh, okay, this player scored me 6-7 points. Like, okay, I can handle it. I just need consistency. It's like they could score 15, they could score 2.
Right.
You had no clue.
Yep.
So, so I do agree. Like, it's just hard. Like I said, I think it's fine to reach. You got your bench clear. You got your bench starting to fill up. You start kind of taking some flyers on, like, all right, I think this guy's RB2 for Miami. I'm going to plug him in. Is that Mostert? Great. Is that a Kane? Did you give him a deal? Like, you kind of have to figure that out. But definitely someone that you're going to want to keep on your bench. Let the season shake out. I'm really bad about that. I'm my style of drafting running backs is I typically look for the high production. I need someone who's going to be like the RB1, from the start. And I'm really bad about being patient with that. So that's a good pickup for fantasy managers, and a reminder it's a great team where you can sit on a couple of these guys on your bench, keep them, see what happens. Week 5, week 6, you're plugging them in. Hopefully they're a good flex for you.
Right. I mean, or you're dropping them and saying, okay, here's the waiver wire pickup I want instead.
Exactly.
I think, and this obviously also, Dalvin Cook's rumored to go to Miami. I haven't seen that yet, but that's still in the mix. I still think, and I'll land on this, if Dalvin Cook signs, all the ADPs get suppressed a little bit. So I think that's even more opportunity to say, okay, what's the shakeup here? Where's the upside? And I still think the running back with the biggest upside is the rookie with Devon Achane, but you may have to wait till midseason before you actually see that. But again, it's a waiting game and see what happens.
I agree.
Yep. Last team here, and I mean, we may not have to get to this quick, but it's Buffalo Bills. And while the division for the last 3 or 4 seasons has run through the Bills, I think offseason wise, they made some of the most questionable. I would say the draft and the lack of certain things in free agency has been very questionable for Buffalo, at least for me. They have lost Devin Singletary and Isaiah McKenzie. They have replaced them, though. They brought in Deontay Hardy, which I think Hardy actually made Twitter news as far as he excelled in one stat. But if you look at overall, he was not really – nobody had him on their team. So it's – we can make – I think that's a noise that we can forget about. But wide receiver Trent Sherfield, they brought in Damian Harris and also Latavius Murray, which I think that he's just a body, but then Kyle Allen. The biggest notable question as far as what they did was they drafted in the first round Dalton Kincaid, tight end, rather than going wide receiver. Um, to me, the biggest miss for Buffalo this offseason was not bringing in a true number two wide receiver. I don't fully support that Gabe Davis is that true number two for Josh Allen for Buffalo. I think Gabe Davis is a good field stretcher, but he's also the guy that he is not great with his hands when it comes to the catch point. And this division, we kind of already brought it out a little bit. The Jets and the Dolphins specifically have made moves to say Buffalo beat us without Diggs.
Mm.
And while um, while news comes out, especially after the draft, of, well, we got our guy with Kincaid, and he's not going to be just a tight end. He's not going to be just that. We're going to use him as a receiver. I will caution all of that with let's ask every fantasy manager that has rostered Kyle Pitts how that's going for him,
Mm. Yep.
or any other rookie or anybody not named Travis Kelsey or potentially Mark Andrews. As how's that going for being the team's number two as a tight end position?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so quick thoughts on Buffalo here before we get to question and players.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I do think Buffalo, there are some question marks, and we can kind of, I have a couple of interesting stats to throw in. We could dive into that later, but I
Yeah,
do think they did miss the receiver mark. I do agree with you. And I think that the lack of number two means that it's a lot of pressure on Diggs to do well. And we saw how frustrated he has been at the end of these games with, either the Bengals or it's been with the Chiefs, right? I mean, just really frustrated when they've lost. And you can tell he's put his whole effort into it and he's trying to do what he can. But between some questionable throws and overall just being neutered in multiple different ways, the Bills haven't been able to get it done. And the expectation for this team was Super Bowl, right? It
yep.
was getting the Super Bowl, representing the AFC at the minimum, and they are rising at the same time, and they're in the lowest of the top tier of the Bengals and the Chiefs right now, right? And I would even say like this season, like they're probably in the same tier as the Chargers. So I think it's sort of 1A, 1B is Chiefs and Bengals, and then below that you've got Chargers and Bills like right there with the Chargers new
You could
offensive
even throw
coordinator. So
Jacksonville in there
it's a
too.
lot. Yeah, yeah, and I think definitely Jacksonville's very. I mean, Jacksonville definitely can do it as well. So I think it's for me personally. Quick thoughts on the Bills, I guess, in a nutshell, is I guess regular real football sense. I don't see how this helped their team this offseason. Fantasy wise, I think we're going to go through the same players. I don't think anything new or interesting is going to happen fantasy wise. I still think you're going to draft Josh Allen. You're still going after Diggs, and then you're going to kind of see how running back situation shakes up, and tight end. You're going to kind of see what happens, like who ends up being his favorite target and things like that. But overall, I think the Bills they seem very vanilla fantasy wise from what they were last year.
So you're in the middle of the fifth round, or not fifth round. You're in the middle of the first round. So you're pick
Mm-hmm.
5. Do you draft Diggs? Or I'd say no. Let's say you're at the end of the first round because this is where it's kind of going average wise. Do you draft Diggs, or do you go different wide receiver, or maybe do you pick a running back?
I probably go Stephon Diggs just because Josh Allen's such a volume quarterback. I mean, he
Sure.
passed for like 4,200 yards last year. So
Yep.
with again not having a wide receiver too, a chunk of those yards are going to Diggs, and I mean he had 11 touchdowns last year. I mean, he averaged he like just a crazy, absolutely crazy number of fantasy points. So, in my opinion, I like Diggs. I think where he sits right now is probably fair. Like I said, if you're kind of end of the into the first, like I guess what, second round probably, like late first,
He's
early
ended
second.
first. He's
Like
going about the 1-8.
I
Yeah.
yeah yeah I think that's a good play. And man, it's really tough. I wouldn't really pick many other running backs
At
over
that,
Stephon Diggs at this point.
I would say at the average draft position, you're either taking Bijan Robinson or Jonathan Taylor
Hmm.
over him, or you're reaching just slightly on whether you're drafting CeeDee Lamb or maybe you're taking like AJ Brown.
Mm,
So that's kind of who the realm that you're looking at with that.
hmm.
So
Yep.
it's not like there's not a wrong answer there. I think it goes
No.
to you know, what's your risk level, your tolerance of that, and but to your point
Hmm.
of him being the focal point, still, that's still I think volume wise worth that type of pick.
Hmm. And what's really interesting with the Bills, a quick little thing here about the Bills. So you
Yeah,
have Josh Allen, who has had the second most fantasy points behind Patrick Mahomes, and you have for the receivers, right? The top two Bills receivers, Stephon Diggs, obviously, Gabe Davis at
yep,
27. So Stephon Diggs is the fourth highest fantasy points. Gabe Davis 27. Absolutely crazy that the second highest fantasy quarterback, and also this is also by yards too, because Josh Allen threw 4,200 yards, which I believe was second
right,
highest behind Patrick Mahomes, who threw for over 5,000, right? So the second highest number of yards, right, which translates directly to fantasy points, right, is you have a number 4 and number 27 ranked receiver in fantasy on your team, and you have the second highest quarterback. That's crazy, right? So to me, that right there shows, from fantasy wise, you I think that reinforces Josh Allen. I know that there's some discussions about real football wise, is he the leader for the team? Is he going to take the team to the Super Bowl and stuff like that? But the volume which he throws fantasy wise, I mean, he's been top three for the last 3 years, right? So
right,
I think you definitely draft him where he is with his ADP. You draft Stephon Diggs, but like it's clearly shown like he's throwing the ball to people. It's just a bunch of different people. It's like Stephon Diggs at the top of the pyramid, and everyone else is kind of making up the base. So I think if you're looking to, like, oh my gosh, the Bills, they're great. They score all these points. Okay, well, pump the brakes a second, because who are you gonna go after, right? I mean, Gabe Davis would be the obvious target, but then he's all over the place. Like, I mean, he had some 0 point games. He had some 20 something plus point games. Like, in
yep,
fantasy, obviously there is a strategy for having these flyers that can knock out of the park, but overall you want consistency. You want to kind of be able to like roll a
mm,
consistent point value out each week, and that's where the Bills are really weird for me this year, because you start looking at the numbers and, like, yeah, Josh Allen's proven the offense is great, but you have one option, you have one weapon. And with all these changes, like, I don't know. I'm hoping someone fills that void, because that team, desperate fantasy wise, managers desperately need a wide receiver too in Buffalo, because it's Stephon Diggs, and then you can't trust anybody else.
right. Well, that actually kind of leads me to who I'm out on because I think most people are gravitating to Dalton Kincaid, being they spent
Mm,
the first round draft capital on him, so he's not going to fill the typical tight end role. They still have
mm-hmm,
Dawson Knox on the team, but Dalton Kincaid's emerging as far as not news wise, but in our minds of what's being said by you go read Twitter, you read, some fantasy football analysts and says, hey, it's Dalton Kincaid. This is who is going to be. And again, I'll go back to tight ends, especially rookie ones, don't automatically step
mm-hmm,
in to a high role. Now, yes, you can draft him in the 12th round, but any good report that comes out, he's going to jump 4 rounds. He'll be in the 8th round, which if
mm,
he goes in the 8th round, all of a sudden you're competing with guys like Pat Fryermuth or Evan Ingram. Darren Waller may drop, but he also may jump. But you're competing with those guys to say, are you going to draft Kincaid on a here's his potential, Go ask every Kyle Pitts manager who's had him, how's that potential working out? That's
Yep.
where I'm out on Kincaid. However, because we are also looking at who's that next guy, I think a potential breakout comes out with James Cook. So the pass catching running back out of
Mm.
the backfield there. He was a rookie last year. Yes, he's Dalvin Cook's brother. They did bring in Damian Harris, but he's more of the between the tackles runner, so he may take some runs away from Josh Allen. However, with James Cook, he showed the ability, and I think he actually was. Let me actually look up the stat here. He was really he did really well with breakaway runs last year. So he excelled in he had the highest breakaway run rate. He finished second in true yards per carry. He made explosive plays, but he also ranked third in yards per touch. So as a rookie, he already showed his prowess to be able to make a big play, plus have a pass catching a role in that offense. So, especially if they're looking for that guy that gets the short fields, they let Isaiah McKenzie go. They don't really have a slot guy. This could be a breakout in that next step for a running back with James Cook, and you can get him in the seventh round.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk about a potential Josh Jacobs from last year, because Jacobs went in the sixth and ended up finishing the top 10. James Cook could be your answer there.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that's kind of what you elaborated on my point I made earlier, which is the offense is set up. Josh Allen's a great quarterback. Um, and I think that if you take a flyer, if you can draft some of these Bills players, if you have room, and you can sit on them for a few weeks and see what happens, the volume is there, and you know the whole blind squirrel gets a nut analogy every once in a while, right? It happens.
Right?
And I think that's what's going to happen is you're going to have several players. We don't know who at the moment. You're going to see weeks 2, 3, 4 develop and some trends. You're going to see some people who are going to get the ball and get some fantasy points. And is that James Cook? Is that this? Is that Dalton Kincaid that everybody's hyped on? I don't know, but the offense has to go through more than one playmaker. It has to go through more than Diggs. And
Yep.
I think Allen's also trying to run the ball less. Coaches are trying to teach that out of him, so it's gonna limit his rush yards there. But yeah, I agree with you. Is the Bills have a lot of offensive weapons. The problem is who's it going to go to, and that's kind of the roulette that the Chiefs have experienced recently too. Is after it was Tyreek Hill and Kelsey, right? Of course, and then it was like who else is getting the ball in this offense? There's like all these playmakers, and so the Bills suffer from the same thing. I would say it's even worse because at least with the Bills, like I mean, with the Chiefs, they have an established tight end, and right now, like Knox, he is a pass catching tight end, but he gets utilized in a lot of different ways, especially with Dalton coming in. We don't know how that's going to work. So I definitely think if you can hold on to some Bills players, keep them, stash them, see what happens the first few weeks. Josh Allen's a favorite target. You can, hopefully get some great value for a pick there.
Yeah, I think the key with Buffalo is, like you just said, don't overpay. So, I mean, while
Mm-hmm.
right now I love the potential of James Cook, if he starts jumping up rounds, I might be out on him. Like, I see potential, but I'm not going to overpay for potential. So, yeah. Well, anyway, that kind of does it for the AFC East. I think this is going to be a fun division again, like we talked about. It's going to be. I personally am hoping that we see some shake up. I think there's definitely the ability for somebody new to enter as the division winner by the end of the season. So it might not even be Buffalo. But yeah, Grant, thanks for joining us again here. Next week, again, if you want to find out when we upload videos, like and subscribe on YouTube, and you find out when we go live there. Also, look for us on Spotify as we are out there as well. But that will do it for this week as far as the AFC East. So thanks everyone Appreciate you as always.